Hello, trumpet players. I'm excited to share some info with you about one of my books. This one is called Trane for Trumpet. And it's a book specifically for practicing giant steps. If you're a jazz player, you probably already know that Giant Steps is a John Coltrane tune, and we place that at the top of the difficulty list because of how quickly the chord progressions move. Now, there are three categories of books that I write, and this falls into the category of books that I wrote for myself. The most popular category is the books that I wrote for my students, and I think the reason that it's more popular is because, if it's a need that my students have, then that need probably exists also for other people, and that's how it's pretty much worked out. Those books, like the Daily Routines book and stuff like that, the Chops Express, those books have been the highest sellers all along, and it's because they were written for students and other students can use them. Then there's another category of books where it ends up just being a good idea. I'm driving down the road and I say, oh, that would be a great idea. So I come home and I put it on my to-do list, and then 10 years later, there's a book. See, I don't like to spend a lot of time on a book like that because those are the least selling. Like The Calling. The Calling is a great book, but it doesn't sell much because there's not a need for it. So now this final category is books that I wrote for myself. Books that I needed some material to practice, and there was not precisely the material I was looking for myself. And that's where Trane for Trumpet came in. Actually, at first it was not intended to be a book. It started off as a shoebox full of scraps. So I would have an idea, I'd write down the idea. There were several torn off bits that were thrown in this box. That's why it was a box, by the way, instead of just a folder. And over the years, I collected so many of them, and I spread them out on the floor to see the difficulty levels and stuff like that. And I filled in the gaps, and voila, there's a book. And so what it came down to was the problems I was having with practicing giant steps is that all the materials out there were for sax. And fundamentally, I'm opposed to that. I'm not opposed to practicing sax materials for the challenge, but I don't believe in practicing two challenges at the same time until you've mastered both challenges. And saxophone stuff on the trumpet is a little bit awkward. It's not idiomatic. The word we use in academia is idiomatic. It's not idiomatic to the trumpet. And yes, I like practicing sax stuff because it pushes you to that next level. But the changes for me, everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, right? My weaknesses on the jazz side are very much emphasized by giant steps. And I was having a really rough time. It took me over 10 years to collect all the stuff for this book, and then I practiced the book after it was done for another 2 years. So that's 12 years of practicing giant steps before I felt like I really knew what I was doing. Okay? And yes, that 10 years did include practicing the sax materials. And that's what I'm saying, is I've practiced through all that sax material stuff, and it didn't get me where I wanted to go. So anyway, so yes, according to my strengths and weaknesses, this was something that was a problem. And yeah, so this book came to be because I had difficulty. And over the years, I systematically created materials that helped me become more comfortable with those progressions. And really, when you get down to it, it's not the 5 to the 1, it's to the 1 to the next 5 that's the problem. And this book addresses that problem. Let's take a look at two of the etudes. This is number 66 and 67 in the book. what you just heard right now is a pretty good representation of what's inside the book. It does begin with 20 basic major third cycle exercises. That's what Giant Steps is based on, and the major third cycles. But from numbers like 19 to 79, there are single chorus etudes, starting kind of simple and then ending up more on the difficult side. And the way this works is you just play through these things, you learn them well. And when I say learn them well, you should be able to glance at the etude after you've finished learning it, glance at the etude, look away, and play it without looking at it. That's when you know how well you've learned it. If you can look away and play it without looking at it, then that's the degree of learning it that I'm talking about. And I'm not saying memorize the whole book. In a sense, you are memorizing the whole book, but you have to look at each etude to remember, oh yeah, that's how that one goes. This goes along with a rule, and I know this is out of context, but I have a rule for my jazz students. Not all of them follow it, but preferably what we want is to never look at the music when we're practicing something that's for our jazz improv. Don't look at the music. So when I say play these etudes by memory, that's why. We don't want to just play through the book like that. Memorize it. Then from that point forward, you're just going through the book, looking at each one to say, yeah, that's how it goes, and then going through it. And so for me personally, this material took me, I'm going to tell you a story. After I finished working on Giant Steps, and we never really finished, but when I got to where I could finally play it in public without being embarrassed, I had a performance at Cezanne. Cezanne is the most prestigious jazz club in Houston, and we played one of my tunes, but it's based on the progressions for Giant Steps, which would include the stuff in this book. And I remember being on that gig. I tell my students about this every once in a while. And I'm playing the tune, improvising, and instead of thinking, what are the chords, or what notes should I play, or anything like that, I'm looking at my valves and saying, wow, look at that. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I didn't have to think about the tune. And this is on the improv, by the way. I didn't have to think about the tune. It was just coming out. Now, I'm not promising you that just a couple weeks and you'll be able to do that too. It was a process of 12 years that led me to that, being able to play that way. But I will promise you that if you get through this book the way I'm talking about it, by memory, you'll never have a problem playing Giant Steps again. You may not have one of those out-of-body experience types, but it will be easier for you. I promise you that much. There are people around the world who have told me that this book has helped them. I don't have any evidence of that, so you'll just have to trust me. But the book does work. So if you're looking to master the Coltrane tune, Giant Steps, this book is going to help you. Oh, and by the way, the style of my etudes tend to be, when I set out to write these, I asked myself, what would Clifford Brown play if he was playing Giant Steps? And so that's the style of the etudes. The note choices that I've used are kind of leaning towards what Clifford Brown would have played. And I'm not suggesting I'm an expert on Clifford Brown. So if someone wants to argue with me, oh, it's not like Clifford Brown, well, I don't care. I'm just giving you a basic idea of where this book is stylistically. It is a little bit more on the conservative side, not on the, let's say, Woody Shaw side. Okay? So, and the reason I did that is I wanted to use that as a home base if and when I decide it's appropriate to go outside on this tune, depending on who I'm playing with. I can depart from that foundation. And for the most part, that's how I play outside. I have that sort of like heavy bebop foundation, but I have ways of moving that out. In fact, by the way, One of the reasons I wanted to learn giant steps is because that's sort of a vehicle that you can use on other tunes. Now, you should do it in all keys, but on other tunes, you can use the material in this book as a way to get to the outside stuff. So there you have it. This is Trane for Trumpet. I'll leave some links down below. Trane for Trumpet. This is a book that teaches you how to play giant steps. If you like this video, give it a like. And otherwise, I'll see you on the next one. God bless you.